The CHOOSECOLS function in Excel allows you to, as you might imagine, choose the columns you want to work with. Now, because you think of, selecting the right columns, it often is used in conjunction with other functions who would be using those columns in some way, shape, or form. Let's take a look at the most basic usage of this. If you use the CHOOSECOLS function and you have, let's say, a table of information that has 3 columns in it, customer, product, and cost, you may decide to use CHOOSECOLS, which stands for choose columns. And the way that the CHOOSECOLS function is set up is the first argument is what is the array of cells that we're talking about. And then the second argument is just whatever the first column is that you're interested in, followed by the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, as many additional columns as you want, if you want any more. You have to choose that first one, but after that you can do whatever you feel like. So let's use the most basic example here. If you looked at all of those columns, customer, product, and cost, and you wanted to just return the first column, right? So you would say CHOOSECOLS, you'd highlight the customer column through the cost column, and then after the comma, you would put in a 1, the 1 representing that you want the first column in the array. And if you don't want any more, then you don't put any commas in, any more numbers, anything along those lines. But let's get a little bit more creative. Let's say that you wanted the customer and the cost. Well, what you would do then is you would say, okay, I'm going to CHOOSECOLS between customer and cost, and I'm going to choose to bring back column number 1 and column number 3 in this data set. The only really interesting thing about CHOOSECOLS is that you can also use negative numbers to come from the other side. So right now, the customer column is column 1, the cost column is column 3, because we're counting from the left side to the right side. You could also go in the opposite direction. You could say that the cost column is the last column at the end. And so we put a negative symbol on this to say start from the other side. And then you put in -1 to represent the farthest right column. -2 would be the product column, and -3 would be the customer column. So you can decide to approach this in a couple of different ways, depending on what you think about your data set, whether you really know how many columns there are, or maybe you just know that one of them is the last column. So that might be an easier way to approach the problem. So how would we use this in real life? As you can see here, I've got a data set where I have the product column, the country column, and then several different number columns here. And it's very likely that I may want to choose one of those number columns or 2 of those number columns and not all of them. So over here, I have in fact said, yeah, I'd love to have the total sales column, the last column on the end. But if you notice, I've also done one other little thing. I've put the country column to the left of the product column, where it's the other way around over here. And this is one of those nice things you can do with CHOOSECOLS. You're not only deciding what to keep and what to drop, but you're also deciding what order to show them in. So I'm going to go to cell K6. I'm going to use the Formulas tab at the top of the screen and find the Lookup and Reference drop-down menu and find CHOOSECOLS right there at the top. When I choose CHOOSECOLS, the full array of cells is just all of these data points. So from C6 to I-128 is going to be the array. And now remember, you are deciding which columns to return, either from left to right or from right to left. So if I want country to come back first, if I go to column number 1, I guess that's the second column in this data set, so I'll put in a 2. Then for column number 2, I want the product column. That's the first column here, so I type in a 1. And then finally, for column number 3, I could count across from the left, but let's just have some fun with it. I know that it's the farthest right column, so I could also put in a -1. And when I click OK, there it is. United States to the left of affinity instead of to the right. And then over here, all of those total sales values. Not bad. Now, I would say it's more likely that you probably don't want the entire data set, but maybe you want to combine this with something like the filter function. So over here on the right, I've set up a secondary usage of this. So up here at the top, you can see that I am filtering based on whether it's affinity or bright side or road flare. So I want to return only some of these data points. But I also only want to see what country it is and how many units are in storage. So again, I'm going to use CHOOSECOLS. So how would I make this happen? Well, if I use just the filter function, I'll be returning all these entries together. And if I use just the CHOOSECOLS function, I'll be returning every data point regardless of what product it is. So I need to use those two things together. Let's go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, go lookup and reference, and first I'll go with CHOOSECOLS because I basically want the filter function to return whatever it returns, and then use CHOOSECOLS to select what I want from there. So I'll go to CHOOSECOLS here, and the array is where I will use the filter function. I'll type in the filter function and open the parentheses. Now, if you've never used the filter function before, you're definitely going to want to get help from Excel on this. So after typing in the word filter in the open parens, you click on the word filter up here at the top of the screen, and you say, okay, what am I filtering? How am I filtering? So the array is going to be from C6 down and across to I-128. The include is going to be how do we know what the filter is saying? And it's the product being bright side. So I'm going to go to the include field. I'm going to highlight all the products in the product column, C6 through C28, and set that equal to what's in cell P5 right here. And if you notice right here, everybody, we've got affinity for the first few rows, and so it's returning false for the first few rows, and then it's starting to return the values starting at bright side. So that's looking good. Now, I wanted to combine this with the CHOOSECOLS function so that we could specify which columns we wanted to return. So go ahead and click on CHOOSECOLS up here at the top of the screen again. And for column 1, I want the country column, which is the second column in the data set. And for column 2, I want units in storage, which is the fourth column in the data set. So now I'll only return the countries and the units in storage for the product called Brightside. I click OK, and there it is, units in storage. Let's make sure we can visually compare these. Units in storage for Brightside in the United States is 18,360. That is accurate. And we can see here that because we're using the filter function, we can use the dropdown and switch it to affinity here and get new numbers, or switch it to road flare and get new numbers. And again, that CHOOSECOLS function has allowed us to grab only what we want out of the data set.